Chapter 1: The Disease Concept of Alcoholism. My name is Andy, and I am an alcoholic. I went to my first ever meeting on May 15th, 1984. I have attended meetings regularly since then. The material in this book is the sum of my 37 years' journey in AA. Its 12-step program has helped me to recover from both drug and alcohol addiction. Yes, addiction to drugs was also a part of my story. However, in keeping with AA's commitment to its singleness of purpose, I will only use the terms drinking, alcoholic, and alcoholism. The addictive demons I've struggled with, besides drugs and alcohol, are an eating disorder, sex and love addiction, and codependency. I refer to them all again in the addendum. It was, however, booze that finally brought me to my knees and drove me to look for help. After many years of relapses in AA, I can finally say that I have achieved a happy, contented, and peaceful sobriety most of the time. This miracle has happened with the benefit of time, effort, and good sponsors. I have grown into a brand new experience of life. It has become increasingly more satisfying as time goes by. As long as I keep applying the AA principles and suggestions to my life, I know that all will be well with me. This would not have been possible in my early days in the fellowship. Nothing I did kept me sober. Then, in utter desperation, after 13 years of relapse whilst going to meetings, I got myself an AA sponsor and became teachable for the first time in my life. All my early failed attempts at staying sober were down to my dishonesty and defiance. At times, I did not get the guidance I needed from sponsors who were not supportive of my agnosticism. I simply refused to give up until the miracle of recovery was also mine. I saw this miracle being fulfilled for many of my peers, but it eluded me for the longest time. I can now say that compared to the person I was when I first came into the fellowship, the steps finally worked for me too. I say this despite remaining an unbeliever. I am so grateful that I did not quit before the miracle of recovery was also mine. For once, I applied my usual bloody-minded stubbornness to learn how to live in the solutions offered by AA and not continue living in the problem. In those early years of my sobriety, all I seemed to have were problems on top of more problems. It would be fair to say that I was the problem. Time and time again, in AA meetings worldwide, we hear members talking about the illness they are suffering from. They proclaim that they are still suffering from the disease even after they put down the alcohol. They freely admit that left to their own devices, without applying themselves to the solutions offered in AA, their lives remain chaotic and unmanageable. They declare that even though they stopped drinking, they are still ill and unhappy. Many believe that without applying the ideas presented in the 12 steps, they will drink again. If they do stay away from alcohol, they continue to struggle with the unresolved personality disturbances that condemned them to drink alcoholically in the first place. We hear these types of admission in AA daily. Some members admit to experiencing something that has been called the dry drunk or untreated alcoholism. What does this mean? Essentially, it means that the people who admit to experiencing these symptoms are still full of anger and resentment. Many report that they still get overwhelmed by the negative feelings they drank to avoid dealing with. Occasionally, members admit to being paralyzed with fear and anxiety. Panic attacks are a familiar experience for many alcoholics, even years after getting physically sober. At meetings, we hear members sharing about having to live with debilitating depression. Feelings of emptiness and loneliness can sometimes drive them back to drinking. They find it difficult to cope with their lives as sober people and almost impossible to find positive solutions to their problems. There are those members, too, who, despite being physically sober, admit to being habitually negative thinkers. They find it difficult to have a positive outlook on life. Many are victims of self-defeating choices and beliefs. They struggle to get along with others. Many of them remain lonely and isolated despite being in the fellowship. Some members are oversensitive and can become easily irritated and intolerant. They can be judgmental and controlling. They suspect that the day may come when they simply won't be able to tolerate how they are feeling and pick up that first drink again. If they do stay sober without a program, many live lives of quiet desperation with little hope that things will ever improve. Tragically, every now and then, you hear reports of suicide by people that have not picked up a drink for years. It sounds extreme, I know, but these things can and do happen. I share these things with you because this happened to me after I put down the alcohol. The pain of my inner life became so unbearable that I was heading for my ultimate self-destruction, stone cold sober. Finally, when the pain of sobriety became worse than the pain of my drinking, I got what has been sometimes referred to in the fellowship as the gift of desperation. It was then that I asked someone to be my sponsor. A sponsor is someone who has been in the fellowship for a while and has had the experience of going through the 12 steps with their sponsor. Provided they still have and are working with a step guide, they are uniquely qualified to support and guide a newcomer through the program. They are also there to support you in other areas of your life in which you are struggling. Later in the book, I devote a whole chapter to getting and working with a sponsor. It is the cornerstone of the 12-step recovery journey. I learned through painful experience that little can be achieved in terms of a happy, ongoing recovery without working with a sponsor. The pain I experienced as a dry yet untreated alcoholic made me open-minded and willing. I soon learned there is a huge difference between being dry and being sober, hence the expression dry drunk. To benefit the newcomer, it seems important that I offer occasional explanations of some phrases and terminology I have learned since coming to AA. Besides dry drunk, another important expression that I learned was becoming teachable. This expression is a powerful description of the kind of attitude required if I want to get well from the alcoholic illness. When a newcomer arrives at their first meeting and decides to give the program their best shot, becoming teachable is the most helpful attitude they can adopt. It would be fair to say that going through the steps is as much an educational process as a journey of personal transformation. It is sometimes hard for alcoholics to become teachable because of defiance. It is described as one of the central characteristics of the alcoholic personality. See 12 Steps and 12 Traditions, page 31. My defiant and belligerent attitude nearly cost me my life. When eventually I got the gift of desperation, I took the suggestions of AA and a sponsor. I stopped thinking I knew better than everyone else. I rejected the idea that my case was different and that my problems were worse than other members of the fellowship. In AA, this attitude has sometimes been called terminal uniqueness. It hasn't been called terminal for no reason. Alcoholics die believing their problems are different. I had to stop thinking that my case was different and stop defying the suggestions. Eventually, I admitted to myself that I did not differ from other alcoholics in recovery. I was so angry and resentful in my abstinence that it kept driving me to pick up that first drink again and again. When I let go of this lifelong crutch, I was left to deal with the festering issues that I drank to avoid dealing with. I was terrified of everything and everybody. I was obsessed with getting my revenge on the people I believed had wronged me. I was very needy and insecure, yet too frightened and suspicious to ask for help. On a bad day, I would become paranoid about other members of the fellowship. I would frequently convince myself there was a conspiracy of rejection going on against me from people in the rooms. World War III was going on in my fevered mind. I quickly discovered why I drank after I got sober. I was a total mess. What I was hearing at meetings about alcoholism being an illness began to make sense. I was experiencing the symptoms of the illness sober. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say, and I say this only in hindsight, that in my early days, I was probably mentally ill. I constantly heard at meetings that I was suffering from a threefold illness: mental, physical, and spiritual in nature. maybe it was true? I did not believe in the ideas when I first arrived in AA. I thought it was all part of some evangelical Christian movement with its continuous references to God and a higher power. This is not meant in any way as disrespectful to people that believe in God. This was my attitude to all things religious. I was very cynical and suspicious about what I heard at meetings. Through the years, I gradually changed my attitude and came to believe that alcoholism is indeed rooted in a spiritual disease of some kind. I concluded this because 10 years of psychological talk therapies could not help me to stay sober and get well. I did achieve physical abstinence from alcohol for long periods. However, I had been unwilling to do the 12 steps and address the deep-rooted disturbances that lay at the core of my inner world. Chapter 5, How It Works, in the Big Book tells us that, quote, our liquor was but a symptom, so we had to get down to causes and conditions, end quote. I was convinced that the causes and conditions of my alcoholism were grounded in childhood trauma. There was no question that this was true. If 10 years of therapy failed to help me stay sober and find inner peace, then at least I owed it to myself to investigate the solutions offered in the 12 steps. Gradually and reluctantly, I warmed to the Big Book idea that my alcoholism is a spiritual illness. I was a deeply conflicted person. Perhaps this type of inner duality could be described as a spiritual sickness? Quote, when the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically, end quote. Big Book, Chapter 5, How It Works, page 77. The idea that alcoholism is a spiritual malady is frequently referred to in the literature. It is also an expression that is often used at meetings. The purpose of this book is to offer an interpretation of what the expression spiritual malady, Big Book, page 64, 4th edition, has come to mean to me, an agnostic in AA. I became very intrigued when Bill Wilson, the co-founder of AA and author of the Big Book, declares that poor mental health would respond to the spiritual solution offered in the 12 steps. I undoubtedly had mental health issues when I first got sober. On top of my alcoholism, I was diagnosed with BPD, borderline personality disorder. Later, I was also diagnosed with CPTSD, childhood post-traumatic stress disorder. Could these personality disturbances respond to, quote, a spiritual mode of living, end quote? Quote, we are convinced that a spiritual mode of living is a most powerful health restorative, end quote. Big Book, The Family Afterward, page 146, 1st edition. My life depended on the answer to that question being yes. Until I began to take the 12 steps seriously, sobriety was such a roller coaster of thought-disordered madness that I was heading for suicide stone cold sober. As an agnostic alcoholic, I gradually began to realize that a spiritual awakening was by no means dependent on a God awakening. This truth continues to underpin my recovery. It has given me a sober life in AA that is beautiful and well worth living. Conversely, I have also discovered that a belief in God doesn't always guarantee a spiritual awakening. Suspecting that my case really was different, I didn't bother getting serious about sponsorship in the 12 steps. I realized that one slogan I kept hearing at meetings rang true. We came to AA for our drinking and stayed for our thinking, end quote. I couldn't deny that there was a lot wrong with my thinking. God or no God, the time had come to address my warped ways of thinking. I was told that the steps would help me with this. Nothing else had worked to alleviate my symptoms. I had to give the program my best shot if I wanted to survive. For a very long time, I could not get honest with myself or anyone else. I was so dishonest that I wouldn't have known the truth about anything if I fell over it. I had no capacity to know the difference between truth and lies or right from wrong. This was not entirely my fault. I grew up in a dysfunctional family where any honesty and integrity were missing. I became what I learned at home. However, the AA literature tells me that to be successful, I would have to become rigorously honest. For many years in the fellowship, I did not have a clue what was meant by the term rigorous honesty. BB, How It Works, page 70, first edition. It is not by coincidence you hear this phrase in AA constantly. I made no progress without it. The main and most dangerous aspect of my dishonesty was my need to play the blame game. I blamed everything and everyone because I turned out to be an alcoholic. My pattern of relapse looked like a revolving door. I was in and out regularly for a long time. It also has to be said that another reason for my failure was external. I couldn't seem to find a sponsor that I could come to trust. It wasn't necessarily their fault. They did the best they could. It was down to me, really. I didn't really trust anyone and was unable to accept much on faith. No question, I was high maintenance. Some of the sponsorship I received was from very well-meaning and well-intentioned people. At other times, it was never really explained why I had to take certain suggestions. What was likely to happen if I didn't take them? Occasionally, things weren't explained so that I could understand. I'm the type of alcoholic that needs to be told in a very simple, practical, and easy-to-understand way why I am being asked to take these actions. How will they benefit me? I may have been unwell, but I believed that I deserved an explanation for the suggestions offered. I needed to be taught the recovery program. That is why I really like the expression becoming teachable. This was an accurate description of the way forward. After years of relapse, I finally met David B. He was such an interesting character and his approach to recovery from alcoholism so radical that I will tell you more about him and his methods later in the book. He was the first sponsor I ever met who told me I didn't need to believe in God for the steps to work. He told me that if I made AA itself my higher power, then I would get well. So the fellowship, David's suggestions, meetings, and step work all became powers greater than me. By this time, with so many relapses under my belt, I had fully accepted step 1. I knew I was powerless over alcohol, and considering my track record of relapse in AA, it became very clear that I could not manage my own life, either drunk or sober. I put myself under new management, the management of David B.'s guidance and suggestions. What truly amazed and surprised me was that my alcoholism and other psychological disorders eventually responded to the spiritual tools offered in the 12 Steps. As I now see it, the spiritual illness was present in me long before I picked up my first drink. It ignited in me when I took my first big resentments, before I was even 10 years old. It was downhill all the way from there. The Big Book declares, quote, "Resentment is the number one offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. From it stem all forms of spiritual disease." Chapter 5, How It Works, page 77, first edition. I realized that if I were going to overcome my problems, I would have to get more honest. It would become necessary to be much more open-minded and willing to shine a new light on my history. When I first came to AA, I did not have the faintest clue what the Big Book meant when it introduced me to the 3 principles of honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness. Moreover, I couldn't understand what they had to do with not drinking. I devote Chapter 3 to explaining how I learned to put the 3 principles into my life. In later editions of the Big Book, we are told that integrating these 3 principles into our lives is essential to get well. They are, in fact, indispensable. This statement is made in Appendix 2 at the back of the Big Book. Its title is Spiritual Experience. An education about the 3 principles has been vital in helping me to get well. For many years in AA, I was a chronic relapser. I am indeed lucky to be alive. I'm so grateful that I kept coming back until I was ready to get a sponsor and take the suggestions seriously. Defiance had been the central feature of my unwillingness to become teachable. My thinking and general attitude to life were very closed-minded and dishonest. I was condemned to keep picking up that first drink again and again. After David, I got a new sponsor called Jamie. I remember asking him, "How did I ever get so dishonest and twisted in my thinking, Jamie?" You know what he said? "Andy, years of practice." How right he was. I will show you what eventually worked for me, an agnostic. Little of what you will find in these pages is my own material. Most of it is learned from sponsors, advisors, and big book studies that I've attended over the years. You will always find it corroborated in the AA literature. The specific method I describe is a collection of ideas and suggestions from many sources. They are still essential in my recovery. I have used the best knowledge I gained. I offer it to you as a potentially helpful resource for your recovery. The ideas I was taught offer very practical suggestions based on taking certain actions. They have proved highly effective in helping me to feel happier and more relaxed in my sobriety. I use the word practical because I needed a method that in no way required me to believe in anything that I could not believe in at the time. I just had to take on trust what I heard at meetings every day. It works if you work it. What I needed was a simple, highly focused, and task-driven method of doing the steps. David B., my first serious sponsor, used to call the steps deep spiritual surgery. I needed these steps to cut through all my denial, dishonesty, and self-delusion, to resolve my inner conflicts and become the person I was always meant to be. I had to eliminate any pressure to believe in some abstract conception of a divine and unseen higher power. I am so grateful that I never left AA because of the God word. I must admit that I came pretty close at times. As the popular fellowship slogan states, don't quit before the miracle. I'm so glad I never did. Once I became open-minded and honest, the 12 steps worked for me, even as an agnostic. I have realized that they work just as effectively for unbelievers as they do for believers. Yes, finding a power greater than me has been necessary to get well. Fortunately, AA itself offered me many positive higher powers that helped me to stay sober and recreate my life. These higher powers came mainly from all the new ideas I was introduced to in the fellowship. The old ideas mentioned on the first page of Chapter 5 of the Big Book warned me that the result would continue to be nil if I didn't let them go. Quote, "Some of us tried to hold on to our old ideas and the result was nil till we let go absolutely." End quote. Big Book, page 70, first edition. It is my hope that this book may offer a way forward for unbelievers. What is sad is that some alcoholics have left AA because of their inability to tolerate the God word. There are those too that won't come to the fellowship because they see AA as some kind of quasi-religion that preaches God. Their reasons for leaving or not bothering to try it at all are understandable. They can easily be overcome by substituting the God word with AA itself. My first sponsor, David B., was a religious man, but he never tried to impose his religious beliefs onto me. All he used to say was, if you follow the instructions in the Big Book, your recovery will be like a walk in the park. He was right. I just had to take his suggestions as he took direction from his sponsor. David called the 12 steps deep spiritual surgery. What follows is the laser surgery technique that finally worked. May a power greater than yourself, however you chose to understand it, guide and illuminate your journey towards recovery. In closing, I would like to leave you with the following thoughts. For many years as an agnostic, I did not take the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous or other AA literature seriously. Frequent references to the God word and a higher power put me off completely. For this reason, I ended up rejecting the AA literature. This was a grave mistake on my part, which, as I've previously stated, almost cost me my life. The plain truth is that the Big Book and the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions contain within their pages the solution to the alcoholic illness. This is true whether you believe in the traditional idea of God or not. If, as a seeking agnostic, my interpretation of the AA literature brings it more alive to atheists, agnostics, and free thinkers, then it will have served its intended purpose. The only thing that was required to be successful in my sobriety was to make AA itself a power greater than me. What was also pivotal to my recovery was a willingness to take the suggestions of an agnostic-friendly sponsor and work through the first 9 steps.